She walked among monsters, but she walked like she belonged there. In the heart of a colossal alien trading station orbiting a dying blue star, Alara moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen worse things than teeth, claws, or the glow of 1,000 foreign eyes. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents of spiced plasma ink, chemical meat, ozone from malfunctioning gravity coil set, and every footstep echoed against the curved walls of a structure not built for human physiology. She didn't flinch when a quadruped merchant brushed past her, its skin lined with bioluminescent veins, nor when a group of spike-armored, hive-speaking traders stared at her with predatory curiosity. She was the only human here, the only warm-blooded anomaly in a biomechanical maze designed for species that had never seen Earth. But Alara's expression didn't change. Her eyes didn't dart, her shoulders didn't tense. She blended not by vanishing but by owning her presence. She was not prey, not decoration. She was a translator, a diplomat. And today, she was though only one man in the galaxy knew that. The Gralkari noticed her the moment she stepped into the upper concourse. 7 feet tall, bone-plated, eyes like scorched coals. Their kind had never truly accepted humans as equals, especially not fragile females who didn't breathe through spiracles or carry their young in warpods. But Alara walked directly past them, cool and quiet, pausing only to glance at a holographic vendor post displaying mineral trade routes. She knew what she was doing. She knew what they were watching for. Every move was calculated, down to the tilt of her chin and the pace of her stride. She let them see her, let them feel superior, let them make the first move. Around her, the crowd pulsed slow, shifting, instinctively reacting to the tension in the air like animals before a quake. Conversations fell to murmurs. Even the ever-humming market generators seemed to quiet. Somewhere above, a lens turned toward her, one of the dozens of security systems that watched everything but intervened in nothing. That was the unspoken law of the outer rings. Power speaks, silence obeys. The Gralkari stepped forward. His name didn't matter. His pride did. Alara had violated protocol, they would later say. Perhaps she walked in a sacred path reserved for warbloods, or maybe she had neglected the appropriate bow. It didn't matter. To the Gralkari, respect was a currency more volatile than antimatter. And this human, this soft-voiced, unarmored thing, had just cost him face. She stopped walking, turned. She didn't smile, didn't speak. The Gralkari curled his claws. The crowd began to shift in a subtle arc, giving space. Some stepped back, others raised recording devices. No one intervened. Alara stood still. Her heart pounded, but she didn't show it. The scar along her wrist of the one hidden under the cuff of her jacket tightened slightly as the micro-tactile transmitter pressed against her skin. No signal yet, no movement. She was truly alone, or so it appeared. The Gralkari's footsteps echoed like the thud of a funeral drum. His voice was guttural, ancient. He called her a skin thing, called her an offspring of parasites. He accused her of trespass, of insult, of disrespect toward a warrior caste that had ruled 4 systems before humans learned to climb trees. And still, she said nothing. A faint breeze passed her ear, the soft current of a plasma vent system recalibrating. She resisted the urge to turn her head. She knew what it meant. He raised his hand, and then she blinked. The moment slowed, stretched, snapped, because in that single breath, the air shifted, not with the sound of a weapon, not with an explosion, but with something worse. See, a presence. It was like gravity leaned for a second, toward her back, and she knew. He had moved. No one saw him arrive. No alarm went off, but someone was watching. Someone had followed, and now, in the heart of a den of monsters, one of humanity's nightmares had just stepped forward, and for the first time since she arrived, Alara exhaled, because she had never been alone. Not really. He stepped out of the shadows like he'd been waiting there for centuries, not hiding, not stalking, simply waiting for the precise moment that would change everything. The concourse, wide and open just seconds ago, now felt like a trap sprung tight with invisible wires. The Gralkari had his claws raised, murder brimming in his black-veined eyes. The crowd frozen in breathless tension. And then he moved. One step, smooth as a ghost slipping between worlds, and the entire atmosphere of the station tilted. No one had noticed him before, not even Alara. but now that he was truly there, you couldn't unsee him, cloaked in matte black composite fabric designed to scatter light. His armor made no sound as it shifted. He didn't carry bulk like a soldier. He carried stillness, a kind of lethal calm that didn't belong in civilian space. The Gralkari snarled, confused by the interruption. Who was this figure? Another alien trying to play hero? A traitor? A fool? The warrior stepped forward, claws tensed, preparing to swipe this interloper out of existence. The crowd buzzed, a half-whisper, half-breath, recognizing that something was about to go terribly wrong. But the man didn't flinch, didn't posture. He simply raised one gloved hand, palm open, in warning. Stop. One word. No roar, no bravado, just a statement. Like gravity, like death. The Gralkari hesitated for a breath, just only, then charged. But in that second, time broke. No one could say what happened first, whether it was the blur of the man's hand reaching beneath his cloak, or the sudden red flash of neural energy dancing across the space between him and the alien. All anyone could see, anyone recording, anyone watching, anyone gasping, was that the Gralkari collapsed. Not shattered, not bleeding, just a broken bar dropped, twitched, paralyzed, every massive limb frozen mid-motion, as if the universe had paused him. The man never drew a blade, never shouted. He simply stepped forward and placed one boot on the ground with the finality of judgment. And suddenly, everyone realized, this wasn't just a man. The crowd shifted again, but this time not to make space for the predator. They shifted away from the human. Whispers rose like static. Earth Sentinel, Terran Shadow Unit. The humans sent one of them. The Gralkari's pride was shattered. The message was delivered without a single drop of blood. A clean, precise warning from a species that had once been mocked as soft, as emotional, as weak. And yet here stood one of Thema Alonia, and he had stopped a battle-hardened warrior without breaking stride. Alara stared up at the man, still pressed to the wall, still shaken but not surprised. Somewhere deep down, she had hoped he was there, that if things went bada, really bada, he would reveal himself. You followed me? She asked, breath catching as her voice finally returned. The man turned his head slightly, visor flickering and low red pulses. I wasn't following you, he replied, voice as cold and flat as an airlock seal. I was following them. Alara blinked. So I was bait. You volunteered, he said. No anger, no judgment, just fact. Because that's what this was all along. Not a diplomatic mission, not a misunderstanding. It was a test, a setup, a signal. They needed the galaxy to see what happened when you touched a human. And now they had. No one moved, not a single claw, tentacle, or cybernetic limb twitched. It was as if the entire alien concourse, the vast, humming market hall carved into the side of a dead Nna, had forgotten how to breathe. The Gralkari lay twitching on the floor, limbs locked by a neural disruptor pulse so precise it didn't even burn his skin. Around him, dozens of alien species watched in frozen disbelief. Moments ago, they had circled him like silent vultures, eager to witness what they thought would be another human humbling, another soft, flesh-born creature taught its place in a galaxy ruled by the strong. But now they saw something else entirely. The Sentinel hadn't made a sound when he moved. He hadn't roared like a warrior or flashed a badge like an enforcer. He simply acted fast, clean, and terrifyingly efficient. The kind of movement only possible for those trained in Earth's Shadow War academies. The kind of silence that comes from years of operating in the dead space between political lines and moral boundaries. No hesitation, no wasted motion, no fear. And the worst part, he hadn't even drawn a weapon. That small gesture, the way he lifted one hand, the way the pulse emitted from a hidden module in his forearm, was proof enough. This wasn't the best of what humanity had to offer. This was a warning shot. The air shimmered slightly with residual energy. Somewhere above, a floating camera drone turned slowly, scanning the faces of every alien present. Some tried to step back into the shadows. Others stood locked in place, eyes wide, breath caught halfway between awe and dread. The neural signature that had disabled the Gralkari warrior would be traceable. unmistakable. The code embedded in that pulse was proprietary Terran military tech, not legal here, not permitted, but no one said a word, no one dared, because now they knew. This wasn't just a human defending another, this wasn't a personal fight, this was a message, a public display of restraint wrapped in dominance, a broadcast that didn't require data channels or press releases. Every alien eyeing the station had just witnessed it. The math was simple. Human plus threatened equals intervention. Always. Even the station's automated security systems are the ones that never blinked, never chose sides or remained silent. They recognized the identity marker broadcasted by the Sentinel's armor, a signal flagged as Tier 0 priority. Translation: do not engage. One Aliena, a lanky, translucent-skinned observer with 6 blinking eye stalks that tried to mutter something. A question, a plea. No one responded. All focus was on the human operative, standing still as a statue beside the fallen warrior. His posture was relaxed, as if he hadn't just neutralized the threat in front of dozens of witnesses. No stance, no alertness, just a broken bar still. That calm was what scared them most. This wasn't someone defending a mate, or a friend, or a fellow citizen. This was a machine of flesh and purpose, delivering a consequence with surgical grace. And now that it was done, he stood there like a monolith, unshaken, unbothered, unmoved. Somewhere deep in the back of the crowd, a low murmur rippled through the ranks of alien onlookers. Not words, not accusations, just one shared understanding. The humans don't send armies anymore, they send warnings. One man, one shot, one message burned into the eyes of everyone watching. Touch one of USA broken bar and we respond, swiftly, silently, without mercy. And in that moment, it became clear. This wasn't just about the Lara, it wasn't even about the Gralkari. It was about the balance of fear in the galaxy, and it had just tilted. She was alone. That's what everyone thought. That's what the Gralkari believed. That's what the crowd of onlookers had accepted as fact the moment they backed away and let her stand exposed in the center of the concourse, facing a predator bred for war. A Lara, small and soft by alien standards, looked like nothing more than a diplomatic casualty waiting to happen, another footnote in a long list of human missteps in alien space. She stood with her back against a curved steel wall, arms slightly raised, her voice calm but firm, trying to de-escalate. It didn't matter. The Gralkari had already decided. His pride was wounded. That meant blood. And no Onia and that station would stop him. The moment became painfully long. The crowd didn't just watch, they anticipated. Their eyes glinted with morbid curiosity. Not because they hated humans, but because they understood how the universe worked. Power respected power. Everyone knew that if a Gralkari issued a challenge and no force responded, the balance remained intact. No guards came, no drones intervened. The silence around her wasn't just apathy, it was compliance. The galaxy had already sentenced her. Alara's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She didn't run, didn't scream. She had accepted the possibility that this might happen the moment she agreed to walk into the station unescorted. She knew what kind of bait she was, and she had faith and certainty that if the moment came, it would be answered. And then it happened. There was no sound, no announcement, no visible entrance, just a shift as subtle and immediate like the air itself suddenly realized it had been ignoring someone who was always there. A figure moved, not from a door, not from a corridor, from within the crowd, from nowhere. He had been standing among them all along, cloaked in shadow and inattention, unseen not because of technology, but because of intent. The crowd didn't react at first. The human man stepped forward, just one slow, deliberate pace, like he wasn't in a hurry because he never needed to be. His hood fell back slightly, revealing the matte black of Terran Sentinel armor, and non-reflective, scarred, and lined with micro-pulse veins glowing faint red. The Gralkari noticed. He turned, snarled, instinctively threatened by the change. But something in his posture faltered. He didn't retreat. A Gralkari don't retreat, but a flicker of hesitation passed through him like a static pulse. Alara's breathing slowed. She didn't turn, didn't speak, but her shoulders relaxed just enough. She wasn't alone anymore. She never had been. The silence wasn't neglect, it was precision. The man's voice was soft, almost unnoticeable, but somehow, Every creature heard it. Back away. That was it. 2 words. No fire, no rage. Just the confidence of someone who had never lost a confrontation he didn't want to win. The Gralkari raised his claw. The Sentinel raised his hand. The room blinked, and the Gralkari was down. It was over in less than a second. No weapon drawn. No dramatic blast. Just a pinpoint neural disruptor fired through a hidden module in the Sentinel's gauntlet. The alien convulsed, collapsed, and lay stunned. Pride shattered, reputation disarmed. Only then did the crowd truly realize, the woman was never alone. She had brought the quietest weapon in the Terran arsenal with her. Not a guard, not a partner, a message. A shadow dressed as a man, a ghost wearing armor. And that message was now seared into every watching eye. Humanity never leaves its own behind. Even when they walk alone. He stepped out of the dark not like a man entering a fight but like the fight had just remembered who was in charge. The transition was so smooth, so natural, it almost felt scripted. One moment, Alara stood alone in a tightening circle of alien tension, the Gralkari's claw gleaming inches from her face, and the next a broken bar. He was there, a ripple in the air, a distortion in presence, less like someone had arrived. More like the environment finally allowed him to be noticed. Every species has their myths. Monsters in the dark, watchers from beyond, ghosts that walk in armor. What the galaxy doesn't realize is that for humanity, those stories became soldiers. And one of them had just revealed himself. The Gralkari never saw it coming, and not just the strike, but the truth behind it. 1 second, he was the apex predator in the room, towering over the human woman with centuries of warrior pride surging through his claws. The next, he was on the floor, twitching uncontrollably, muscles locked by a neural blast so precise it didn't break skin, didn't spill blood, it just turned the lights off inside his body. It wasn't a fight, it wasn't even a struggle, it was a statement, delivered in a single flash of controlled power. And that's when the realization hit the crowd. This human didn't just win, he dominated him with effortless superiority. For the aliens watching, it was like seeing a myth breathe. A Sentinel, an elite human shadow operative trained to dismantle armies, trained not just in tactics or weapons but in fear, had stepped into their world without fanfare and dismantled one of their best with the twitch of his wrist. No chest beating, no theatrics, just lethal purpose wrapped in silence. The crowd, once buzzing with curiosity and bloodlust, now stood frozen in collective awe. For a second, it wasn't just about the Gralkari lying defeated on the floor, it was about what had just been revealed. Humans had the power all along, they were just quiet about it. The other aliens, once content to watch Alara be torn apart, now felt the air tighten. Breaths were held, eyes darted. There were no footsteps, no alarms, no drawn weapons, and yet everyone felt more threatened than if the Sentinel had arrived with a fleet at his back. It was the calm, that haunting calm, the kind only possible when someone has no doubt about what they're capable of, the kind of calm that comes from 1,000 drills and zero gravity, from surviving Black Ops missions where failure wasn't even an option, it just meant no one ever found your body. Even the automated systems in the station, coded to remain neutral, flickered for a heartbeat, recognizing the identity signature of a Terran Black Tier operative. No species wanted a conflict with Earth, everyone knew the stories. Colonies lost without a sound. Battles ended before they began. Treaties signed under shadows cast by ships that were never officially there. Now those stories had a face, a still, quiet man in armor, standing next to the woman no one thought would survive. And she didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Because this wasn't rescue, it was retribution, delivered with restraint. The Sentinel hadn't killed the Gralkari. That was intentional. Dead warriors become martyrs. Broken ones become warnings. The crowd would talk. The feeds would spread. The station's central net had already logged the entire encounter. Footage would hit 12 sectors in under an hour. Every alien would ask the same question. Who was he? The answer would be whispered, never confirmed. A Sentinel, an Earth ghost, proof that no matter how far humanity had spread, no matter how civilized they seemed, that they never stopped breeding wolves. And just like that, the hierarchy of power shifted, because what every onlooker saw in that moment wasn't just a human winning a fight. They saw the terrifying possibility that the humans were never weak, they were just waiting. He wasn't supposed to be there. That's what they all thought, just a cloaked figure in a crowd, unremarkable, unarmed, unthreatening, until a Gralkari warrior lay crumpled on the floor, defeated without a scratch, and the quiet man stood unmoved. Then the whispers began, and not from the humans, but from the aliens. Soft, urgent, trembling tones in languages shaped by mandibles, tentacles, and static chord vocalizers. One word found its way into every dialect, every throat, every mind at once: Sentinel. And with that word came the crash of realization. This wasn't some human bodyguard. This wasn't a protector. This was an agent of message. And the message was terrifyingly clear. The Gralkari weren't just powerful, they were untouchable. Their empire had conquered worlds long before humanity discovered faster than light travel. They carried titles like Blood Noble and Death Sworn. To challenge a Gralkari in public was to invite war. To defeat one was to break a sacred barrier of fear that held the galaxy in balance. And that's exactly what the Sentinel had done in less than a second, with no visible weapon. With no effort at all. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was upheaval. Dozens of aliens stood frozen, many looking at the downed warrior, others staring at the human like he was something they hadn't trained their minds to recognize. Not a soldier, not a diplomat, something in between, a hybrid of code, instinct, and vengeance. The Sentinel said nothing more. He didn't raise his hands in warning or call for peace. He didn't need to. His presence was the declaration. Every movement now was observed with a reverence that bordered on fear. The cloak he wore, the armor just barely visible beneath it, the unblinking visor, all were suddenly too real, too sharp. There was nothing decorative about him. Every piece of him was function, wrapped in the aesthetic of finality. A small-bodied alien with glowing throat sacs whispered to its companion, "They sent one." That was the part that no one could process. Not the strike team, not a formal security detail, not even a political envoy. Earth had sent one man, one human, dropped like a chess piece onto an alien-controlled station in the heart of neutral space, with no announcement, no warning, and yet here he was. And the entire concourse had bowed to the weight of his actions. Some tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was luck, a Lurhathi vendor muttered. Maybe the Gralkari was sick, unprepared. But even they didn't believe it, because luck didn't move with that kind of precision. Luck didn't make a seasoned predator collapse before he could blink. And luck definitely didn't broadcast Earth's most feared title across military networks in a way only the right people could read. A small blinking light on the station's info drone flickered red. Unauthorized signal trace. They'd captured the neural disruptor's frequency signature. Top-tier Terran military tech. Not for export, not for sale, not for diplomacy. Only one kind of human carried that kind of device. A Sentinel-class operative. The kind used when Earth wanted something understood without using ships or nukes. A living message. A walking doctrine. One that said, "We don't need to shout. We just need you to remember what happens when you forget who we are." The Gralkari hadn't just lost a fight. He had triggered a protocol buried deep in the collective fear of interstellar politics. Do not touch the humans. They look soft, but they remember everything. They smile easily, but they study everyone. They trade. They negotiate. They make friends, but when they protect, they do so without hesitation, without debate. And when they send a Sentinel, it's not to negotiate. The crowd felt the weight of this without anyone needing to explain. They had just watched a myth take form, and the myth had a human face. Not glowing, not divine, just deliberate, cold, focused. And when the Sentinel finally turned slowly, silently to look across the crowd, no one met his gaze, not even the brave. Because this wasn't about the lark anymore. It wasn't about one insult or one warrior's pride. This was the soundless drawing of a line in space. A declaration without banners. A warning dressed in flesh. From now on, every species in that hall would whisper it behind closed doors, behind council walls, in military briefings and smuggler bars alike. Earth doesn't send soldiers, it sends sentinels. And when one walks into your world, you listen, or you bleed. Alara was still trembling, not from fear of the Gralkari but from what had just happened. The warrior lay frozen on the floor like a monument to arrogance, body seizing under the lingering pulse of neural disruption. Around them, 100 alien eyes tried to process what they'd witnessed. And beside her stood the man who had made it happen, and not panting, not rattled, just standing there like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Alara turned to him slowly, the tension still clinging to her spine like a wet cloak. Her voice cracked through the silence, barely more than a whisper. "I told you I didn't need a bodyguard." Her tone was bitter, not sarcastic or real, because Alara was no fool. She hadn't wanted protection. She didn't like being shadowed, even if the person behind her wore black armor and could stop a predator mid-charge without breaking a sweat. He didn't look at her, not right away. He scanned the crowd, tracking every twitch, every movement, silent calculations playing behind a face hidden beneath visor glass. Then he turned just slightly, enough for his voice to reach her without needing to raise it. What he said wasn't for comfort, it wasn't even personal. "You don't," he said, voice flat as dead space. "I'm not your bodyguard. I'm here for the message." And with those words, everything made sense. Alara had been to not because she was weak, but because she was visible, known, a known diplomatic presence in neutral space, a name on the Gralkari's watch lists. She was a trigger. And he, the silent figure wrapped in shadows and ghost-tier armor, was the payload. The realization didn't sting, not exactly, because Alara had agreed to this. Somewhere in a sealed Terran strategy room orbiting Earth, she had signed off on this plan. "Use me," she had said, "make it loud without making a sound." But the moment she had felt the Gralkari's breath against her skin, the moment that claw had risen, her mind hadn't been thinking about tactics or political optics. It had been screaming survival. And now that the moment had passed, her body was still coming down from that silent cliff edge. But he wasn't. He was already gone, in a way. His stance didn't loosen. His voice didn't shift. He wasn't emotionally present, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't afford to. That's what it took to do what he did. That was the cost of being a Sentinel. You didn't act with anger. You didn't protect with love. You executed with purpose. And the purpose here was not to protect her. It was to ensure that the Gralkari and everyone else watching understood what happened when a human was touched without permission. This wasn't rescue. It was a broadcast, and the clarity of it hit Alara harder than anything the Gralkari had threatened her with. She wasn't the mission. She was the channel. She had been the empty air before the thunder. The crowd hadn't moved, not because they were waiting for more, but because they already got the point. The silence was deafening now, and not out of fear, but out of respect. Not for her, not even for the Sentinel, but for the reality that had just been forced into the open. That humanity, for all its diplomacy and open-hand alliances, still kept something locked in the dark, something precise, something cold, something deadly. She looked at the Gralkari warrior, a massive, proud, now humiliated before species who once bowed to his name. He wouldn't die from this. He'd live. But his legend was over. The tales of his strength would now end with the pause, followed by a single phrase whispered in fear. Then the human arrived, and Alara knew, deep in her gut, that this moment would travel. It would skip from world to world, through encrypted feeds and pirate networks, not as a story, as a warning, a recalibration of the galaxy's perception. Because the message was clear now: you can insult a human, you can threaten one, but if you touch one, Earth sends ghosts. The crowd didn't gasp. They didn't have time. It wasn't drama, it was pressure. Pure, silent pressure. The kind that makes your muscles tense without knowing why. He wasn't tall by alien standards, not glowing, not grand, but something about him, the way he stood, the way his cloak shifted slightly with every micro-movement of his armor's internal systems, it triggered instincts across a dozen species: danger, intelligence, control. He didn't sprint, he didn't shout, he stepped on Sia, and the air itself seemed to get out of his way. His visor lit faint red for half a heartbeat, scanning, calculating. His gaze locked onto the Gralkari, not with fear or anger, but clinical intent, the kind of look predators give just before they strike you, not for survival, but principle. The Gralkari turned fully now, confused but not yet afraid. He raised his claw higher, misreading the situation, thinking this was just another meat shield, some arrogant human protector trying to interrupt ritual punishment. But then the man spoke. One word: stop. That was all. No aggression, no volume, just authority. And it hit harder than a weapon. The warrior charged. That was his mistake. Time didn't slow up, it shattered. In less than a blink, The man's right hand flicked forward from under his cloak. Not a gun, not a blade, just a flash of blue-white energy pulsing from a glove-mounted emitter calibrated for single-target neural interruption. The Gralkari's charge ended mid-stride. His massive body seized, twisted, and dropped to the deck like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence. No one cheered. No one moved. Because it wasn't a victory. It was a demonstration. The man lowered his arm, cloak drifting back into place, and stood completely still. Not triumphant, not smug, just silent like a storm that didn't need thunder to announce itself. And in that moment, the galaxy watching through 100 feeds and 1,000 terrified eyes learned something permanent. Humans don't posture, they don't warn, they end things, quietly, efficiently, without compromise. He wasn't there to fight, he was there to witness the moment when the galaxy realized just how far humanity was willing to go to protect even one of its own. And now, they all knew. He turned to the crowd, and not with rage, not with fire in his eyes, but with something far more dangerous. Intention, the kind that doesn't ask for silence, it commands it. The alien onlookers didn't flinch because he raised his voice, they flinched because he didn't have to. With the Gralkari warrior still twitching on the ground behind him, the Sentinel stood as still as stone, eyes scanning the gathered dozens of merchants, pirates, diplomats, even off-duty soldiers, all frozen by the same invisible weight, the weight of what they'd just witnessed. A human operative had taken down one of the most feared warrior castes in the galaxy, a broken bar in under a second, a broken bar, and without killing. That detail mattered. The restraint spoke louder than any weapon ever could. Then he spoke, only one sentence, no anger, no threat, just certainty. And that certainty rolled across the alien crowd like pressure in the chest during a hull breach. Touch another humana and next time, we don't aim to miss. That was it. That was all. But it felt like a supernova detonated behind his words. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was comprehension. Everyone heard what he said, but more importantly they understood what he meant. This wasn't the soldier making a threat. This was a man speaking on behalf of a species, and not just any species. Humanity, the one race no one could fully categorize. Too adaptable to predict, too emotional to manipulate, too terrifying when provoked. And now, the Sentinel had drawn a line in the air without a blade, without a guna, just presence, precision, and policy wrapped in human skin. In the far corners of the crowd, some of the more seasoned aliens began backing away, not in fear, but in strategy. They understood how messages like this moved through galactic networks. Within the hour, command centers would have the footage, sentiment trackers would spike, political briefings would be called, and every diplomat who ever scoffed at Europe's emotional instability would suddenly have new talking points. Never provoke a Terran response team. Even the Gralkari elites would take note. This wasn't just humiliation, it was a breach of perceived immunity. They had always assumed that if they struck a lone human in neutral space, there'd be a statement, a protest, a tribunal. But this was immediate, surgical consequence, not legal action. Action, period. And perhaps worst of all for them, it wasn't even the worst humanity could do. They all knew it. They felt it in their bones. The Sentinel hadn't killed the Gralkari not out of mercy, but because killing would have been easy, because death is forgettable. But defeat, shame, humiliation on a public station, that lasts. As the Sentinel lowered his hand and let the words hang heavy in the artificial air, he didn't look for approval. He didn't check if Alara was okay. That moment had passed. He was already scanning the exits, already planning the next move. Because to him, this wasn't a personal win. This was the job. He wasn't here to argue. He wasn't here to be liked. He was here to change behavior. And judging by the silence in that station, by the dozens of aliens who no longer dared to meet his gaze, by the shift in how humanity was being seen in real time, he had already succeeded. Message received. They didn't walk out like heroes. They didn't run, didn't gloat, didn't even glance back at the Gralkari still twitching on the cold deck. Alara and the Sentinel moved forward side by side, wordless as the crowd slowly parted before them like mist around a rising flame. Not because they were feared like monsters, but because they were now seen as something worse, unpredictable, controlled, and impossibly effective. Every eye that followed them understood that this wasn't the end of a fight, it was the beginning of a shift. The hierarchy of power in the galaxy had tilted, and it had taken just one moment, one man, and one act of precision to do it. No alarm sounded, no guards rushed in, the station's eye let them pass, aware of the Tier 0 clearance code now echoing through back channels. The Sentinel's armor emitted no heat, no signal trace, no threat display. But its silence was the threat. Aliens who had once joked about Earth's emotional fragility now stood breathless, wondering just how many of these ghosts humanity had in reserve and how many were already walking among them, cloaked in anonymity. Alara said nothing, but she felt the shift. Not just around them, but within her. She'd volunteered for this mission knowing the risks, trusting the plan. But now she understood the gravity of what had happened. It hadn't been about stopping one violent act, it had been about broadcasting deterrence. Humanity hadn't flexed its military, it had flexed its restraint. And the galaxy had listened. They passed a trio of guards who didn't speak, didn't salute, just stood aside, eyes wide, shoulders straight. The message had already spread. No need for violence. The footage would do the work. The whispered stories would carry more power than any gunship. And every council, every war room, every strategist watching the feed would now have to ask themselves, what happens if we touch another human? Because the next Sentinel might not stop with a warning. In the upper tier of the station, a diplomat froze mid-call as the surveillance footage hit her screen. A smuggler dropped his drink in a dive bar. A weapons merchant quietly closed his human trafficking deals. The shockwaves traveled faster than light, and not through data, but through fear, respect, and the unshakable memory of what it felt like to be in that room when the air itself chose a side. The humans didn't shout, they didn't threaten, they demonstrated. And as Alara and the Operative disappeared into the crowd of one, a symbol of trust, the other of wrath, held on a leash. The station slowly exhaled. The moment passed, but its echo would remain. Because now the galaxy knew, humans may walk alone, but they are never unprotected.